There are two basic approaches to setting up multi-track sessions in Audition. One, you create a multi-track session that is full of empty tracks that you will later populate with files, which are clips inside a multi-track session. And the other is to take a bunch of files here inside the Files panel, select them, and then insert them into a multi-track session all at once. So I'll show you both approaches in this tutorial. To follow along, go get this multi-track session by going to the multi-track session subfolder inside the working files folder, and then bringing in 1202 setting up multi-track. I'm having you bring in this multi-track session just so you get these files here in the files panel, which then makes it easy to make a multi-track session from them. We're not going to worry about this multi-track session. It's going to go away here in a second. So let's talk about the way to make a multi-track session that is empty to begin with. There are two approaches to do that. You can click on this icon here and select New Multi-Track Session. Notice that the keyboard shortcut is Control N in Windows, Command N in Mac. Or you can go to File, New Multi-Track Session, the same three choices again with the controller Command N there. The one place that you can't go that you think you would be able to go is to multi-track. You can't make a new multi-track session here. This is for use within the multi-track session. So let's go to File, New Multi-Track Session. That opens up the new multi-track session dialog box with a few little items that you need to put in. First of all, give your multi-track session a name. So I'm going to call it a multi-track example. And need to give it a folder location, so I suggest you put that in your My Audition exercise files folder, not in the working files folder. So you want to go to that guy and put it inside that folder, whatever you named it. I suggested you make this folder way back when. If you didn't make one, it's best to put this in some place besides your working files folder, because it will make some changes now when you do this. It'll put new files there. So click OK. And then you want to choose a template. Now the default template is none. It really should say default, but it says none. It creates a multi-track session with 6 empty tracks and a master track. And these are the default settings for those tracks: a 48,000 hertz sample rate, 32-bit floating point bit depth, and a stereo track for the master track. Now I'm going to change this from the default settings as an experiment to show you what happens when you do this. Notice that all the files over here that we're going to use to populate this new multi-track session have 48,000 hertz sample rates. The rule of thumb is that you want your multi-track session sample rate to match the sample rate of the files you're going to put in it. But if it doesn't, that's okay, because when you bring in a file that's a different sample rate, Audition creates a new copy of that to match the multi-track session sample rate. So that's pretty cool. Let me show you how that works. So I'm going to purposely set this to 44.1 instead of 48, and then click OK. And when I do that, you can see it opens up this blank slate. It also does something else to the file folder. Let me just switch over to that. Inside the My Audition Exercise Files file folder, a new folder is created named after the name you gave to the multi-track session. And inside there is the multi-track session file. Okay, that's all well and good. I'm going to back up one notch. I'm going to show you what happens now if you bring in a file that's the wrong sample rate. Close this guy down. Now I'm going to bring in a file. I'm going to talk about how you bring files into multi-track sessions in a different tutorial, but I'll just give you a basic look at it here simply by dragging this file in. And you get this message that says, okay, the sample rate of this inserted file doesn't match the sample rate of the session. If you click OK, we're going to make a new one that does. So no big deal, but that's letting you know what's going on here. I'll click OK, brings in that base file. It creates a new one. It names it base 44100 because that's the sample rate for the session 1. And it adds it over here in the files panel. And this is not one of those temporary files tucked away in some temp folder someplace. This guy is immediately accessible and will be on your hard drive in a logical location for you to access later. And then if you choose to delete it, that's up to you, but it won't be in some temporary file folder where if you close the session, you may lose it later. I'll show you that. Here's how it looks. Inside the My Audition exercise files, here's that multi-track example folder. Inside there now is another folder that has all the conformed files. So every time you bring in a file that doesn't match this session in terms of its sample rate, here's where the new one goes right there. One other thing that happens when you create a multi-track session and then make a recording in it is that it also uses that folder. So I'll show you that by clicking on this little R button to activate the recording for that track. I'm going to mute this first track so that we don't get bass inside the recording there, just have this track being recorded. Click the record button down here and off we go. I'm going to record my voice into that track. And when I'm done, I click stop, and that immediately puts this file that we made there here inside the files panel, right down there. It gives it a name based on the track number, and it's the first one we've made for the track, so it's track 2 and the first cut for that track. But also it stores it in a logical place that you can track down later. Let me show you that. Here inside this folder again, we've got the multi-track example. I'll back up one more notch. There's the multi-track example session folder. Inside there now is a new folder that says multi-track example recorded. So all the recorded files go here. They too are not temporary files. They're put here for your use down the road. They won't disappear or anything like that when you close this session or close Audition. Just want to show you how those folders work. All right, let's make another empty multi-track session by going to File, New, Multi-track Session. This time I want to use one of these templates. If you take a look here, you see a bunch of template choices. And if you read them, you might go, what the heck do they mean by that? For example, radio VO with music ducking. That's a voiceover, and music ducking is a technology that allows you to have music go down in volume when the voiceover kicks in. It uses another technology called side chaining, which I'll explain in the checking out some extra features section of my upcoming tutorials. And there are a few other odds and ends here as well, but we're going to go with the full rock band preset, which is a huge setup which has sends and outputs and buses and all kinds of stuff in it, as if you were going to have a huge rock band recording session. So I'll click on that. We'll call it rock band. Now the rest of these items are set for you. You can't change them. The sample rate's 44.1 because it's kind of assumed you're going to make a CD out of this or maybe some MP3 files. The bit depth is 24 because that's kind of the mid-range bit depth for a lot of recording sessions. And we're going to have a master output of stereo as opposed to 5.1, which would be more likely to be put onto a DVD. So we've got our preset all ready to go, and I click OK, and that opens up this new multi-track session with something you haven't seen before, a metronome track, which is like a click track, so a drummer can hear the rhythm very consistently. And that click track can be played in the background. That wouldn't be recorded to the final output, but that way the drummer, for example, can hear that while they're laying down the rhythm track, or anybody else can hear it as well. You notice that all the tracks are already named. It's assumed that you're going to have a bunch of drum microphones hooked up, high tom-tom, low tom-tom, overheads, which you have a couple of microphones above the drum set, and then have all those guys output to the drums bus. Then you can apply effects to the drums bus and then have that bus go to the master track, which I talked about this whole methodology inside the introduction to multi-track sessions in the previous tutorial. You can see there's all kinds of other options here, guitars, vocals, things like that. They're already set up for what might be, or what presumably would be, a very large, full-bore, multi-track rock band recording session. So that little template lets you do that. And then you can modify templates as you see fit by adding tracks or deleting tracks, which I talk about again later in upcoming tutorials. Okay, those are the two methodologies that you can use to create empty multi-track sessions. Either just accept the sort of none default, or else select one of these templates. So let's move on to using files and then making multi-track sessions from files. I'm going to go over here to the Files panel and select all the files that I want to put in a multi-track session. So I'm going to click on Base. I'm going to go down to the end here and Shift-click on Snare to select all those files. I can't put a multi-track session in a multi-track session, so hold on the Control key here in Windows or Command key in a Mac to deselect that when I click on it. Scroll up here a bit, deselect this one as well. Let's see what else we've got here. I think we got all the guys deselected that I want to deselect. So now we've got 9 files that I want to put into a multi-track session all at once. There are 2 ways to do that. If I right-click on it, it's going to be an Insert into Multi-track menu command right there, and I put in a new multi-track session. Or I can click on this button that appeared when we made some selections. You probably might have noticed that was grayed out before, not active, but now that we've selected some files, this becomes active, and it's the same basic menu command that you'd get when you right-click like that. So here's this little button up there, and we say, yeah, insert this into a new multi-track session. Yeah, and it gives us that same dialog box again. So I'll call this one Files Multi-track, so we can differentiate it. I'll put it in the same folder we had before. I don't want to use the rock band template, but it is interesting that it did switch to a sample rate of 48,000 because it sees that we're bringing files in here that are 48,000 sample rate. So even though the full rock band as a default of 44.1, since we're using files at 48,000 sample rate, it shifted this thing behind the scenes. But I don't want to use a full rock band. I want to go back to none. Now I need to change this to 48,000. There we go. 32-bit floating point, which is fine, and stereo, which is fine. And now I click OK. And that creates this multi-track session with 9 clips in it and a master track. And now that we've done that, let's just switch over to the multi-track my Audition exercise files, and notice that we now have 3 folders in here, one for each of the multi-track sessions we made. This is the one that we made from the default setting, Rock Band. This is the one we just now made. And again, it's just one multi-track session, whereas the guy we made first, where we added some recording to it and plus conformed the files, there are the subfolders there. So that's the basic approach to making multi-track sessions from scratch here in Audition. You can create a multi-track session that is empty, just waiting for you to populate it with files. Or you can take files and turn them into a multi-track session. But after you do that, you're not limited to what you've just created from the template or from the files. You can add tracks, you can delete tracks, you can add what are called bus tracks, or do other customization. And even then, you can make your own templates that you can use down the road. And I explain all those topics in several upcoming tutorials in this section.